Hello, everyone. I am Henri Makembe, and welcome to another episode of Do Big Talks, where we discuss the latest trends in the ever-evolving world of digital advocacy. On today's episode, I am very excited that we'll be talking about influencer engagement in the nonprofit world with Nicole Rogers, who's the founder and executive director of Family Story, an organization we're lucky enough to partner with earlier this year. Welcome, Nicole. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm Nicole Rogers. I live in DC. And as I said, I run Family Story, and we're an organization focused on addressing issues of family privilege, by which we really mean all the ways that families outside of traditional norms, sort of non-traditional families, are often sort of excluded and disadvantaged in ways that are often invisible to a lot of us.
Awesome. Thank you. And I was really excited to work with you all because, again, my family falls outside those traditional norms, right? So I think one of the things I love about working at Do Big Things is we get to kind of do this different work that is both personal and it has the opportunity to make a wider impact. So I was very, very excited to be part of this. And as I mentioned, we got a chance to work together. Do you want to go ahead and maybe tell us a little bit about the project and the background of how it got started and how it came about?
Sure. So we came to you with the project that was about changing narratives about single mothers. And if you work in the space that I work in and you think about non-nuclear and non-traditional families a lot, it becomes apparent pretty quickly that the families that are the most stigmatized, disadvantaged in a lot of ways, and stereotyped are single mother homes. First of all, there's a lot of them. There's about a quarter of kids today being raised by single parents, and the vast majority of those are single mothers. And we were worried about the way that single mothers were talked about in culture, in policy, in the media. And what we noticed is that there tended to be sort of a couple things going on. One is a lot of sort of residual stigma from really long ago kind of welfare reform, or welfare queen kind of conversations that came out of sort of the Reagan era and had been baked in and sort of reinforced for decades, that made assumptions of single mothers as being either lazy or choosing not to work so they could collect checks, or all these things that really were both offensive and frankly just wrong about single mothers. And what we didn't see was a lot of conversations about what's so incredible about single mothers. And I kind of came to this space feeling like single mothers are portrayed in a way that runs totally counter to how I actually think about them, which is really as like superheroes in a lot of ways. It's like incredibly strong, as sacrificing really deeply for their children. I think there's also this misconception that many single mothers didn't plan on being single mothers, and therefore they've somehow failed in some way. And I think when you actually talk to single moms, what you realize is even if their situation is suboptimal in some ways, they always say it's better off this way, because of course what they're talking about is often separating from, distancing themselves from, etc., partners that were not good for them in some way or another, or not good for their family. And that's their perception, of course. And so they actually see single parenthood and becoming single mothers as something that's been, in certain respects, liberating. That's not to say it's not with a lot of hardships, but we never hear the empowered stories of single mothers, and we never hear the positive ones about how incredible they are. We tend to hear kind of either pitying stories or judgmental stories.
Yeah, and I think from my perspective, I think some of the research that you brought along when we started the project and the conversation was really, really eye-opening, right? How single mothers saw themselves, how they think about single motherhood and their family structure is, again, a lot of those stories were untold. So for us, I think we found it to be amazing to be able to, in some way play a part in telling that story from a different perspective and from a different lens. And that was really attractive to us, I think, when we started working together. But with that said, we had to pivot right in the middle of that campaign. Let's discuss a little bit about how did we get to a point where we felt like we needed to pivot on how we tell that story.
Well, interestingly, we came in with a very traditional think mindset towards this is sort of a communications effort, which is to say we were thinking originally of something sort of creating bespoke kind of original content in a more traditional way using scripting and actors. And we went through a lot of rounds of just sort of trying to think through concepts. And we never really landed on anything in all of our kind of back and forth together that felt really authentic or compelling. And we really didn't know why. We knew something wasn't quite right, but we didn't know what. And what really ended up happening is after sort of back and forth and kind of coming up with nothing that kind of got us really excited, you all came to us with something that was sort of a really novel and interesting strategy, which was a TikTok strategy. And at first, that was obviously a little bit scary. You know, first of all, a lot of us were too old to be on TikTok. That's not true. There's actually a lot of people our age on TikTok, but we weren't. None of us were TikTok aficionados. And the initial, of course, fear when you do that is sort of, well, don't I lose total control, and isn't that going to be a problem? But one thing that y'all did, which was really helpful, was you pulled a bunch of actual TikToks from single mothers that were really, really powerful. And something kind of clicked for us, which was, we've been going into this thinking the content that we want doesn't exist anywhere in the world. We don't see it. And the reality is it was actually being created in real time by single mothers on TikTok day in and day out. And you had to look for it or be a part of those worlds to find it, but it was there. And it was a real aha moment for us to just feel like maybe we're not actually starting from scratch here. Maybe the content we want exists at least in some iterations or some forms in the world already. And maybe the single mothers that are on here, these real single mothers, are actually better equipped to tell their stories than any actor we could hire, and anything we could script is probably not quite as good as something that they would come up with on their own, because they're actually telling their real personal stories.
And this is where I have to give you a lot of credit, is like you were very open-minded about that. Be like, we have the research, we have the data, but maybe we're not the best storytellers for them, like, right? And I think a lot of organization and a lot of folks would not have kind of taken that approach. So I want to give you all the credits in the world to just being like, okay, let's take a step back. Like, we want to tell that story, but like, are we the best messengers for that? And if not, let's find folks who are. And I think you were, yeah, just your open mindedness, I think was great to work with from that perspective.
Well, and I think the other thing we realized in the TikTok sort of strategy as that became more of a real option was, we'd been thinking about scripting women to sort of tell stories of single mothers, and we thought about how to integrate their children. And then another thing TikTok provided was, well, we can actually look for children raised by single mothers on TikTok. Certainly there's some of them. And we can get actually we can get sort of a test of two different kinds of groups of people talking about single motherhood. We can get the single mother stories, and we can get those that were raised by single mothers. And that ended up being a great value. And actually, one of the sort of surprise successes of the campaign was that some of the content from the children of single mothers, actually outperformed that of single mothers. So it gave us some interesting new perspective on who should tell that story.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest takeaway from us, from our perspective as well. As we definitely expected the single mothers stories to come through, but it was actually an audience that we had not identified at the beginning of the campaign,
Right.
which is folks raised by a single mother, and their ability to tell that story, and kind of how they saw their parent, and having that resonate so deeply with folks. So that was very yeah, that was very interesting from our perspective, and certainly something we did not expect. What other kind of successes do you think that you weren't planning on, that you didn't see, that you saw throughout the campaign?
Actually, I think first of all, we were surprised by how many people actually were interested and wanted to sign up to do this. We weren't totally sure if either the single mothers or the children raised by single mothers would sort of want to be public and tell these stories, particularly the children, because a lot of the mothers were already kind of on there telling their stories. But we got a really good response, obviously through working with our intermediary who did influencer management. What we kind of were getting back is there's actually a fair amount of people interested here, which was good to know, and not something necessarily we had expected. And I think the other real success is just looking at the TikToks that were created and looking at kind of the feedback and the comments. They really resonated with a lot of people. I feel like I learned that there was more of a hunger for this content than I'd initially realized. And I think because, and we can talk about this a little more, I think because we gave the influencers we worked with a fair amount of free range, they really created things that were authentic, and that actually created experiences for their audiences that were very powerful, and people really liked it. I mean, we anticipated that there might be some pushback. Everything I do, there's some pushback from somebody from like a traditional families organization or something that, thinks we're glorifying single mothers, or thinks that or wants to point out lots of stats about how what concerns them about single mothers or single mother homes. And in this case, really the response, and part of this is just the built-in audiences you get when you work with influencers, but it was so overwhelmingly positive, and that was really heartwarming.
Yeah, 100%. And yeah, I think just the support that came from the communities, and especially even after we used some ad dollars to kind of boost it to a wider audience, the consistency in terms of like the positivity was just amazing to see, and yeah, felt good. I will just say that. I'll just say felt good.
Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you think that you didn't know going in?
I mean, I think the primary challenge of working with influencers is really giving up a lot of the control. Obviously, when you're hiring actors and doing scripted content, you have total control over what's going to be said, what things are going to look like. And it was a little scary to sort of cede control over to a group of influencers that we really didn't know. We had a lot of debates internally, sort of as we tried to sort of sort through and pick the influencers we wanted to work with, about what we were looking for. And we realized, I think we started in a place of really looking for kind of the perfect spokespeople and the perfect sort of influencers for this campaign. And actually what happened throughout our work was we got looser and looser and looser with our restrictions. We started with, we don't want people who are in all these different sort of worlds that sort of aren't related to single motherhood or don't have anything to do with their role as parents or etc. We dropped that very quickly. We actually got some of our most interesting TikToks from people who are in worlds like fashion, but they happen to be raised by single parent, they happen to be raised by a single mom. And I think the more we let go of that control, the more we let go of our notion of kind of a perfect spokesperson, actually the more interesting content we ended up getting. But it was definitely a challenge. And I remember this sort of as we were putting together the creative brief to go out to influencers, really trying to resist saying too much and really wanting to just say like, here are just some core things, but let's not tell people too much that we want them to do, because we're actually going to stifle their own authenticity and their own creative spirit if we get in the weeds with them.
And I think that's something that we struggle with is like, right, what was the client comfort level versus pushing the boundaries, like, right? Because it was very interesting from that perspective, where we wanted to give the creators as much freedom as possible, but also wanted to make sure that we kind of tell the right stories. And so that is a push and pull that I don't think ever goes away, but I think we just need to acknowledge and work through it. And again, I think that's where you were very open-minded, and again, much credit to you, right? I remember we got, I think, a profanity laden video, and we were like, well, let's see if we can do another one, but this one's pretty good.
Yeah, I
Right.
mean, this is a perfect example of like really trying to expand our own thinking. I mean, now that's not, the video you necessarily show at like, your funder convening when talking about the project, although we did just show it to a group of funders.
That's awesome.
Somewhat mixed results, but I think mostly people were actually thought it was hilarious. But when that video came back, that was a child of a single mother and was totally profanity laden, as you said. My first thought was this video is, I mean, this TikTok is actually amazing. My second thought was, but we can't have a TikTok with like swearing in it, can we? That's not going to work. And then we sort of went back and said, well, why not? For this project, why not? Is there like, and this is where it goes back to again, this need to sort of loosen the grip and trust influencers. That TikTok looked a lot like other TikToks she created, which is to say they're all profanity laden. And I think to get hers in this one specific example, she that's her style. She's crass, she's funny, and I think if we had tried to rein her in too much and say, can you do the safe for work version of this TikTok? I don't think people would have responded as well to it. I don't think her audience would have, and I don't think we would have gotten something as good, frankly.
I couldn't agree more. I think that one is still one of my favorites, and maybe we'll
Yeah,
link to it in the comments.
yeah.
It's still one of my favorite. So, having gone through kind of to that experience in working with influencers, how would you recommend other organizations start an influencer engagement campaign or
I
program?
mean, yeah, I think the first thing to do is to really go to new places where your audiences or the people that you're looking for might be and see what kind of conversations they're already having. I mean, that was the big takeaway for us in this campaign was that we went in with this assumption that these types of stories and conversations didn't really exist in any major way. And we found a world of single mothers telling their stories that were incredible and robust and gave us such a great starting point for the campaign. And I don't think that I think when we think about what can we use influencers for, we tend to think like, well, here's what we want, and here's what we can sort of try to get from influencers if we script this from them, if we get them to sort of sell our issue or sell our product or whatever it is. But in reality, there's just a lot of that already happening. So I think I would say start by doing some digging and looking around for that because it's a good sign if some of it already exists. It didn't to me. It wasn't like, well, there's no reason to do this campaign. There's already single moms online. It was like, oh, these are perfect spokespeople. These are the perfect people to be creating these TikToks for us because they already are naturally in this mindset. We're not asking them to go out of their comfort zone or asking them to do anything that feels inauthentic to them. We're actually speaking to something that they all are deeply invested in and care about, and it's already part of their identity. So I think that's sort of my main piece of advice is sort of, and I think the other piece of advice I would give is don't run away from influencers who have a niche that's completely outside of your issue area. Like I said, the top performing TikTok in our campaign was by a fashion influencer, and I would have initially thought of writing her off as like not the right fit. But actually, what happened, which is interesting, is you get this audience of people in that case who are not necessarily exposed to single mother content all the time, who don't necessarily think about these issues. And now you've got them on, they come there for the fashion content. They learn about the story of this woman and her single mom. And that's actually in some ways the best get you can have because that's actually expanding your reach and expanding your audience into new places that you wouldn't have looked. And I think that that struck me as a bad fit at first and then ultimately struck me as sort of hitting gold.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. And especially since a lot of organizations are in this place where they're trying to broaden their audience and attract new folks to their communities, right? And so part of that is looking at those communities from a different perspective and different lens. So
Yeah.
if I was to recap, number one would be loosen the control reins. Number two is give a little bit of creative control to the content creators. Number three would be to scour kind of like the various places where the audiences are, right?
Yeah.
And then be open to kind of who would be part of those campaigns. Would be kind of like the last one. Did I get
Yeah.
those all right?
I think that's right. And I would actually add, because I should give them credit too, that it's worth really it's worth really testing your assumption about what funders want. I think that we assumed that they would prefer a more traditional video. And actually, when we came to them and we said, listen, I know we've been doing this project for a while and this is what we expected, but we're making this big pivot. Here's how we're thinking about it. Here's why a TikTok strategy feels like really exciting and interesting to us. And, we all held our breath and they said, that's incredible. So, big credit to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation for actually, like in this case, really being very willing to think on their feet, to hear our argument, and to turn around and support trying a new strategy. And I think, I had a lot of nerves going into that conversation and was sort of concerned that they might say, like, we're not funding you to make TikToks. Actually what they said is like, oh, I'm so glad somebody's trying a TikTok strategy. It's not used very much in our world and it should be.
That is awesome. Yeah, and I remember us prepping for those conversations. So,
Yeah.
very good point. And
Yeah.
thank you. And with that said, Nicole, thank you so much for joining us.
Very welcome.
And thank you, everybody else, for staying with us for another installment in Do Big Talks. If you have any topics you'd like to discuss, reach out and fight Do Big Things. And stay tuned for future episodes. Have a good one, everybody.